I'm going to invite you to turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 1. And while you're doing that, let me thank Tony. And for those of you who are not aware, we invite our elders and elder types to regularly share prior to communion for a number of different reasons. One reason is we believe every member of Prescott is a minister and has something to offer, has a contribution to make. We also believe God speaks to everyone, not just specialized types like pastors and teachers and professors. No, we believe God speaks to all of us. And we believe that iron sharpens iron. And so we want to give as many people as possible the chance to sharpen us. So thank you, Tony. And it has taken a number of weeks, if I can count, on a Sunday morning. I believe this is the 11th week of our series. And we have come to the conclusion. We've spent the last, or I guess counting today, the last 11 weeks, focusing in on our emotions. And during that time, we've covered, okay, you're not going to, there we go. During that time, we've covered a lot of ground. Boy, some of those aren't on there. Anyway, we started with fear many moons ago. Went to anger and disappointment and bitterness and inferiority. Considered worry and guilt and loneliness and burnout and abandonment. And this morning, as we wrap up our study, we're going to finish up by focusing on stress. And I want to start with kind of a simplistic definition. I'm sure if you go to a more technical book, you'll get a more technical definition, but stress is really just the wear and tear of life. It affects us physically, it affects us mentally, it affects us emotionally and spiritually. It affects our relationships. We could define it again as the pressure or the strains that we experience simply because we're alive and simply because we have to deal with the stuff that life throws at us. And the simple fact is no one is really immune. It's not like if you're experiencing stress, it's not like, oh, well, you're doing a lot of things wrong. Now, it's quite possible you're doing a lot of things wrong, but you could do a lot of things right and still experience stress. We live in a broken world. It's somewhat inevitable. If you remember, after the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus wrapped that sermon up, and he told a story about a wise man and a foolish man. They built houses. And then what happened? The storms of life, right? Storms of life are normal. They're inevitable. They will affect you if you're a wise man. They will affect you if you are a foolish man. The good news is when we think about stress, even though it's a reality, even though none of us are immune, we're all going to experience it throughout our life, the good news is it can be controlled. But that means we have to understand how it works. And to understand how it works, I think that the starting point there is to recognize that stress develops in stages. Doesn't just happen all at once. It's something that's cumulative. It's something that builds. It requires a certain amount of time. It starts with what we would call the reaction stage. I can't believe I don't have a screen for that. I do have a screen for that. I didn't mark it. That just goes to show you it's the 4th of July week. Anyway, it starts with the reaction stage. And it's exactly what it sounds like. The storm comes. Some kind of stressor begins to affect us. And what we do is we intuitively, I don't even know that we stop and think about it. We just intuitively begin to react. Those who study such things say that our physical bodies react to stress as if we are actually being attacked. And our body literally begins to send chemical messengers into our bloodstream that enable us to react. And we'll tend to react in one of two ways. And we've all heard that phrase, flee or fight, right? We're going to react in some way to the stress as our body begins to react. And that reaction leads to what we might call the resistance stage. And there are all kinds of ways that we can resist. We can withdraw, flee. We can go on the offense and attack whatever it is that is causing the stressor. We can go into denial. We can dig our heels in and roll up our sleeves and determine in our minds that we are going to endure this thing. We're going to ride it out. We're going to survive. Now, if our reaction leads to some sort of success so that the stressor is dealt with, we will return to normal very, very quickly. I talk about this all the time. We really are like rubber bands. There is built in within us a certain degree of elasticity, whether that's mental, physical, emotional, but we have that bandwidth that we can deal with an awful lot of stuff. And so if whatever we respond with is successful, okay, the rubber band's going to relax, we're going to get our elasticity back, and life goes on. If we fail, we have to understand that rupture is inevitable. We can't just keep stretching the rubber band indefinitely. At some point, it will break. It has to have that chance to relax. And so if our efforts fail so that the pressure just continues, and because this is the way life works, more stuff gets added to it, eventually we can do nothing but buckle under the stress. We rupture. And we cannot live there. And that's where how we react, what efforts we bring. Remember, we talk about the heart exam all the time. What's happening and my efforts, and we always say the aim for later, and we for whatever effort we make, we always have a reason down here, HEART, and T reveals treason or trust. Our reaction is critical. When we look at what's happening, aim means I look at that and I say, okay, God, what would you like to see happen as far as an outcome in this moment? And before I say anything, before I do anything, I better aim and ask God what he would like to see happen. And then I can offer him something that he can work with to bring about that outcome. Our aim is critical. Our reaction is critical. Because if we don't relax that rubber band, it can only do one thing. It will break. And so here's what we're going to do this morning. As we've done throughout the study, we've taken different individuals from Scripture and kind of used them as a case study. We're going to basically do the same thing this morning, only we're going to use the Apostle Paul, and we're going to let him teach us how to deal with stress when we experience it in our lives. And we're going to start in 2 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 8 to 10, where I think we get a really good picture of what stress looks like and what it feels like and how it affects us in our lives. Starting in verse 8, we do not want you to be uninformed, brothers and sisters, about the troubles we experienced in the province of Asia. We were under great pressure, far beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired of life. Indeed, we felt we had received a death sentence. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. As Paul starts sharing his life experience and as he starts painting this picture of stress, he starts by mentioning hardships that he experienced in Asia. We'll get to verse 10 later. We don't know exactly what he's talking about there. More than likely, we would conclude he has spent the last 3 years of his life planning a church in Ephesus. The book of 1 Corinthians was written while he was in Ephesus. 2 Corinthians is being written after that 3-year time in Ephesus. He's now crossed over the Aegean Sea and he's up in the area of Macedonia, probably Philippi, and he's making his way down to visit Corinth. And it's kind of a follow-up letter to the first letter that we know as 1 Corinthians. 2 Corinthians is actually a third letter. We don't have the second one. Anyway, that's extra this morning. So he's probably thinking about the 3 years that he spent in Ephesus, because that's really the only significant time that we know of that he spent in Asia up till that time in his life. Now, he first went to Ephesus at the end of the second journey. He had the last church he planted on that second journey was in Corinth. He goes across the Aegean Sea, and Ephesus is really right across the Aegean Sea. He's making his way back to Antioch, the church that sent him out on his missionary adventures, and he's going to give them a report of here's what's going on, here's what's happened. And so as he makes his way back, he stops in Ephesus. He recognizes, man, this would be a great place to plant a church. It's a strategic city. We could kind of consider it the capital of Asia, if you will. And so when he began his third journey, he made Ephesus kind of the primary focus on that third journey. And he took 3 years to plant a church there. And as I said, we don't know what specifics he's talking about as far as these hardships he experienced in Asia. Here's what we do know. He began his ministry in Asia following the normal pattern that he had used throughout his missionary adventures by starting in the synagogue, because there's a common ground there. He could walk into any synagogue and present himself as a Jewish rabbi, and he could take their scriptures and use their scriptures to point them to faith in Jesus Christ. And that was the normal pattern he used throughout his life experience. And he lasted about 3 months in Ephesus before they ran him out of the synagogue, because they saw Christianity as a threat. And when he was run out of the synagogue, he spent the rest of his 3 years turning to the Gentiles and sharing the gospel with them. And we know he spent 3 years there because in Acts 20, verse 31, he had a meeting with the elders of the churches in Ephesus, and he actually says, hey, you guys remember when I was with you for 3 years. So we know it's 3 years. We know he had great success, but we also know that success came at a price. I'm going to read a couple scriptures, kind of the old-fashioned way. Starting in Acts chapter 20, I'm going to read verses 18 to 20. This is that same meeting with the elders from Miletus. He says, when they arrived, he said to them, you know how I lived the whole time I was with you, from the first day I came into the province of Asia. I served the Lord with great humility and with tears, although I was severely tested by the plots of the Jews. You know that I have not hesitated to preach anything that would be helpful to you, but have taught you publicly from house to house. And so we know he experienced persecution and conspiracies against him from the Jews. We also know he experienced difficulty from the Gentile community because his ministry there was so successful. He literally started a citywide riot. We read about this in Acts chapter 19. Starting in verse 23, about that time there arose a great disturbance about the way, meaning about Christianity. A silversmith named Demetrius, who made silver shrines of Artemis, thought or brought in no little business for the craftsmen. He called them together, along with the workmen in related trades, and said, "Men, you know that we receive good income from this business." They're making idols and different instruments that were used to worship the goddess Diana. And as a result of Paul's ministry, what's happening is their business is dying. It's kind of like some of the old revivals in the 1800s and things like saloons and brothels and casinos would all be shut down because of these revivals. The same thing was happening in Ephesus. You see how this fellow Paul has convinced and led astray large numbers of people here in Ephesus and in practically the whole province of Asia. He says that man-made gods are no gods at all. There is danger not only to our trade will lose its good name, but also that the temple of the great goddess of Artemis will be discredited. And that was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. And the goddess herself, who is worshipped throughout the province of Asia and the world, will be robbed of her divine majesty. And when they heard this, they were furious. And they began shouting, "Great is Artemis of the Ephesians." And soon the whole city was in an uproar. And the people seized Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia, and they rushed as one man into the theater. Now, like I said, we don't know exactly the specifics and the details as far as this hardship. What we do know is that I doubt very much the last 3 years that Paul spent in Ephesus was very different from all of the other years that he had lived once he had turned to Jesus Christ. It's interesting. We all know the story of the road to Damascus. Within days of converting to Christianity, Paul's life was in danger and he had to escape. And he's been on the run and escaping pretty much for the rest of his life, simply because he was being used by God as the apostle to the Gentiles. The one, if you remember Acts 1:8, you'll be witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, the uttermost parts of the world. Well, God's using Paul to get to that uttermost parts of the world. And because he is so effective, he's literally wearing a bullseye on his back. Satan is constantly stirring up trouble against him, trying to shut his ministry down. So he starts by explaining, I don't want you to be ignorant of these great hardships, whatever they may have been. And then he describes how it was making him feel. And he says, we were experiencing great pressure. In the King James, it's a little bit more eloquent in his wording. We were pressed out of measure. If you've ever made like a Play-Doh figurine, and then you weren't happy because your horse kind of looked like, I don't know, ugly, and so you said, and you started over. That's what Paul says he felt like. I felt like I was being pressed out of measure. I was being squeezed out of shape, as if I was in the grip of like a boa constrictor or a python that was just, squeezing the life out of me. And the pressure was so great, it literally was beyond human endurance. And I don't know about you, but I find that a little bit of a shocking statement on the part of Paul, simply because it's not the idea that that there would be some kind of pressure or stress that would seem beyond human endurance. I think that's kind of normal. What I think is kind of shocking is I know the kind of stuff Paul has experienced throughout his life. And here he's talking about, well, I don't want you to be ignorant of the hardships. He doesn't mention what they are, but it's hard for me to compare. If you remember on the first journey, in one city in Galatia, they literally drug him outside of the city and they stoned him and left him for dead. And we have some details there, right? We have details of plots against him where he got let down in a basket because he was staying at a place that was on the wall of the city, and that's the only way he could escape because they were watching the gates, and as soon as he showed up, he was going to die. So I know some of the kind of stuff that he had experienced that he never said, oh, this was beyond human endurance. But these unknown hardships in Ephesus, are now beyond human endurance. To me, it's like, wow, that must have been some kind of hardship that Paul would say, and the language is such, he's not just saying it was beyond our ability to endure. He said, this is beyond human endurance. No human could have endured this kind of thing. And because that's how he's feeling, he concludes his sharing of, this is how I'm being affected, that he despaired even of life. Now, this is not Paul being suicidal. This is Paul kind of accepting reality. He sees his circumstances as hopeless. He sees these circumstances as there's no way out. He's been in all kinds of predicaments. But this time it's different. And I just want to give us a sense. Now, some of these things have already occurred in Paul's life. Some of these things would yet be future in his life from the perspective of our text this morning. But this will give us a sense of what Paul dealt with in his life. Are they servants of Christ? I am out of my mind to talk like this, but I am more of a servant of Christ than all of them. He's dealing with some attacks that have been made against him in Corinth. So he's defending himself. He says, I have worked much harder. I've been in prison more frequently. I've been flogged more severely. I've been exposed to death again and again. 5 times I received from the Jews the 40 lashes minus 1. 3 times I was beaten with rods. Once I was pelted with stones. 3 times I was shipwrecked. We know of 1 time he was shipwrecked, but he says 3 times he was shipwrecked. I spent a night and a day in the open sea. I've been constantly on the move. I've been in danger from rivers, in danger from bandits, in dangers from my fellow Jews, in danger from Gentiles, in danger in the city, in danger in the country, in danger at sea, and in danger from false believers. I've labored and toiled and have often gone without sleep. I have known hunger, I've known thirst, I've often gone without food. I've been cold, I've been naked. And on top of everything else, I face daily the pressure of my concern for all the churches. And so when we look at this text and Paul says we were under great pressure, it was beyond our ability to endure, so that we despaired even of life. We get a sense of what he's feeling. And if we're going to describe him in this moment, we would use words like he's exhausted, totally drained. He's empty. One of the things we all know about our automobiles is you can fill your car up. In fact, nowadays they have little gauges. Anybody remember the days when you kind of drove and hoped you had enough to get to the next gas station? Now we have little things that tell us when my little light comes on, I always push the button for display and it'll tell me how many miles I can go. And then it's like, okay, well, I can go to church and get gas on the way home, or I better go get gas right now, or I'm going to be walking to church and then walking back to my car, and that sort of thing. And you just can't run indefinitely if you don't put more gas in your car or more electricity in your battery. Guess what? You will run out. He's empty. I think distortion is a good one, because that's what pressure does. It attacks us mentally, and sometimes it's hard to think clearly in times of great pressure. I think it's safe to say he's feeling devastated, kind of in shock, kind of powerless and paralysis. I think he's deflated. Hopes and dreams have been popped like a balloon. The Bible says hope deferred makes the heart sick. I think we could use words like defeated. This is a hopeless situation. This is the end. And I think he's disheartened. Why even try if the situation is hopeless? These are the kind of things stress does to us. And like I said earlier, when we start getting to that rupture stage, which I think is exactly where Paul is, we can't live there, because rupture is inevitable. If we don't give the rubber band chance to break, it will eventually break. It can do nothing else. And so what we're going to do is we're going to spend the rest of our time, because we started with the premise, even though it's inevitable, even though it's real, it can be dealt with. It can be overcome. And we're going to let Paul teach us how that works. And so now we go back to verses 9 and 10. And Paul's going to start explaining, here's how he overcame his stressors. Indeed, we felt we had received the sentence of death. But this happened that we might not rely on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly, or he has delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us again. On him we have set our hope, that he will continue to deliver us. Now, the first thing Paul does as he starts to share how we can be free from our stress is he starts with this phrase, we had the sentence of death, or felt like we had been given a death sentence. Now, we know previously from verse 8 that he despaired even of life. And the two thoughts are connected. But he's not, when he says it is as if we felt we had a sentence of death, he's not speaking out of hopelessness. I think he's at the same place. Do you remember the story of Jacob? Jacob was always a conniver, and his conniving got him in trouble at home. His brother Esau was going to kill him, so he ran to his uncle Laban. And if you're familiar with the story, he got in trouble with his uncle Laban. And he burnt that bridge, and he had one place to go, and that was home. And I want to say it's about Genesis 30, 31, 32. He's on that journey home. He can't go back to Laban. That bridge is burned. And he has messengers come and say, hey, your brother Esau is coming out to meet you as you journey home. And he doesn't know if Esau's coming out with like a welcome party and it's going to be a family reunion, or a war party and he's going to end up dead. And so he's literally between a rock and a hard place. I can't go back. I can't go forward. And so he divides his family and all of his possessions into two parts with the thinking they can't get both parts. One part will escape. And then he spends the night all alone, and that night he wrestled with God. And as he was wrestling with God, it started to break light. So it's about dawn, and God says, hey, if the sun comes up and you see me, you'll die. He says, do what you have to do. I will not let you go until you bless me. And I don't think he was being suicidal, and I don't think he was speaking out of hopelessness. I think he was speaking out of, I've got one option, I've got only one option, and that option is God. When Paul says, it's as if we had the sentence of death, I think what he's saying is, you know what? I'm tired of the reacting. I'm tired of the resisting. I kind of figured out that all my fighting and all my resisting has gotten me nowhere. This problem is bigger than me. I see that now. This is not the kind of thing that I can handle on my own. This is the kind of thing that only you can handle. And so I think Paul is letting us get inside his mind and see what he's thinking. And as he does, he tells us, I recognize that God is in this. God let this unfold. God let me struggle. God let me resist until I came to this realization that I should not trust myself. I need to trust him. And that is not an easy lesson to learn, because we instinctively respond with that reaction and that resistance. And I'm not even saying that that's a bad thing, because God has given us a mind. God has given us physical strength. He's given us different abilities so that we can live successfully. And so there's a lot of things in life that we should be able to, and I believe we are responsible for handling on our own. There are other things in life that are bigger than we are. And we should not try to handle those things alone. Our resisting and our reacting in those contexts will be futile. In those moments, what we need to do is transfer our trust over to God. And that's what Paul's saying here. It finally dawned on me. It's like, okay, God led me to this point so that it's like I just got a death sentence. What can I do about that? Absolutely nothing. And God allowed me to get here. Why? So that I would stop trusting myself and I would start trusting him. And we don't get there, at least in my experience, any other way until we have done a good bit of reacting and resisting. Usually, it's been my experience, it's not until I've tried everything I know to try. And I finally come to the situation where I've realized, well, nothing has worked, and this is kind of hopeless, and I'm stressed out. and the rubber band has no more elasticity, it's about to break, that it dawns on me, well, you know what? I've got one option here, and that is God. And just like Jacob, as he wrestled with God, you just grab hold of God and say, okay, God, I'm going to ride this one out by clinging to you because I have no other options. It's an act of dependency. And here's the neat thing. As we transfer our trust to God and we start depending on him and we lay aside our reacting and our resisting, when you put your trust in God, look at what Paul says about God's power. First of all, he said, we would not trust in ourselves, but in God. And what did he say? He's the one who raised the dead. Not only did he himself raise, he raised people like Lazarus. He has life-raising power. And if he has that kind of power, what am I going to face in this world that is beyond God's power to handle? And so it's really important to understand that. As I transfer my trust over to God, he's got this incredible power that nothing that I could ever face is beyond his ability to deal with. And then Paul starts thinking about his past. And he says, you know, I've been in all other kinds of jams, and we read about many of them. He's always delivered me. Now, I look at some of those things. When I mentioned in Galatia, he was stoned and left for dead. Now, only two things can explain that. One is those people didn't know how to stone people. Because if you understand stoning, I mean, we've seen it in movies where you know they pick up these little rocks and throw, and you get some cuts and scrapes and bruises. That's not stoning. Stoning, they throw you in the pit, they cover you up with stones, and the end of a stoning, they take a really big one and they crush your skull with it. They make sure the job is finished. And so these people could have been really bad at stoning, or Paul actually did experience being raised from the dead because God was not done with him. And I lean in that direction because I find it incredibly difficult if people are so angered that I'm going to drag this guy out of the city and stone him and then walk back in the city thinking, okay, we took care of that guy. I'm older now and I'm a lot smarter. When I was younger, I used to think things like, well, you know what? If someone ever came in my house and I had to defend my property, I'm going to make sure they're dead, because I'm not interested in spending the rest of my life looking over my shoulder for when that criminal gets out of jail and comes after me. If you ever have to resort to violence, this might be because I grew up in the city of brotherly love. There's a lesson I learned. Finish the job. If you have to resort to violence, make sure that guy is never going to be able to revisit those circumstances again and seek revenge. I think they killed him, and God raised him up. But regardless of that, Paul looks at his past and says, you know what? God's bailed me out all the time. Guess what? You know what? I think he can bail me out in this time. In fact, I don't even want to restrict it to this time because I know the storms of life are going to keep coming. As long as I am upright, as long as I am drawing breath, I'm going to keep having these storms. In whom we trust, he will continue to deliver us. And let me go back here. Make sure I'm pushing the right button. Oh, I need verse 8. Well, we can do it here. Verse 9 starts with, indeed we felt we had received the sentence of death. And we end with, on him we have set our hope that he will continue to deliver us. And at the end of verse 8, that's tacked on to verse 9, we despaired even of life. So think about, we despaired even of life in verse 8, and we've set our hope on him that he will continue to deliver us. Please tell me what changed between the end of verse 8 and the end of verse 10. Because I would tell you, absolutely nothing has changed circumstantially. The only thing that changed is Paul has transferred his trust over to God, so that he's no longer resisting and reacting. He's no longer trusting himself. He's now trusting in God who raised the dead. And the only thing I see that changed is Paul's trust. Now, I suspect, I probably need to get back to where I was. I suspect that many of us can identify with like Paul's description. I experienced all of these hardships. I was under great pressure. It was beyond my ability to endure. I began to see this as a hopeless situation and despaired even of life. I bet you we could all identify with that. Question I would ask is, can you identify with his response? Like I said earlier, I don't have any problems with reacting and resisting and using the mental capacity and the emotional capacity and the physical capacities and the skills and the things that God has given us to deal with life. But at some point in all of that resisting and reacting, if we begin to recognize, no, this isn't one of those things that I can handle. This isn't one of those things that I can control. Because everything I'm trying is not working. There's a reason for that. God's looking down and he's sensing, hey, I'm up here. I promised you I'd never leave you or forsake you. I promised you I'd be with you always. I warned you, without me you can do nothing, but with me you can do all things. So hey, I'm the lifeline. Give me a call. That might be why God's letting your efforts be futile. And what I do know is if we do not lower the stress levels, and we do that by transferring the trust, we do that by putting our dependency on God. If we don't lower the stress levels, the only thing that we can do eventually is rupture. I'm a firm believer, without God we can do nothing, but with him we can do all things. So, when you begin to experience stress, what I would suggest to you is don't rely on yourself. Cling to God. Tap into his power. Submit to his will. And the more you do that, two really good things happen. Number one, he can handle it. And he does. May take a little while. It's not necessarily an easy thing to do, to cling to God and write it out. It may take some time, but he will handle it. His promise to us, and I think we looked at it last week, all things work together for good. I've never seen that be untrue. And I don't expect I will. So the first good thing that happens is he handles it. The second good thing that happens is the rubber band gets a chance to relax. You regain your elasticity, and you begin to experience the peace of God that passeth all understanding. Let's pray together. Father, I am thankful for Paul's life. I am not so thankful for all of the things he had to endure and experience, But on the other hand, I am thankful that he did all of that and that he wrote about those things so that we can learn through his experience. And I know I am quick to react and resist. I know I am not quick to turn to you. I often try to exhaust all my resources, and then it's, oh yeah, let me talk to God about this. And I suspect there's others in this room just like me. So I really thank you for Paul's example. And I pray that he would help us understand how the faster we transfer our trust to you, the faster we cling to you and your power, the quicker it is that things are going to work out. You tell us plainly in Proverbs, trust in the Lord with all your heart. Lean not to your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will direct your paths and make them smooth. May it be so in each of our lives. Because smooth is much better than stress, Father. I pray in Jesus' name. Amen.